uh, what kind of crops to grow, the timing of those, and how to protect the plants. I did do a video for this webinar on season extending that will be available afterwards. I believe Libby will be sending out an information packet with links to that video, which will go over some of this information and give you the visuals of it. And I have a handout that I put together that will also be in there. We'll give you a lot of links to a lot of the things that I'm talking about. And of course, remember, all this is being recorded. So if you don't want to take notes now, that's fine. You can always come back, go to the link and listen to it again or watch it again at a later time. So season extending, one of the things about season extending I've been noticing is that we've been getting longer and longer falls, in the sense that the weather seems to be staying warmer. And it's not just this year, I've noticed, with the 90 degrees in September and 70 degrees in October, but it's been kind of a trend going on for a while now. And what that does for a vegetable gardener, it sets up a situation where you can extend the season much easier and get a lot of vegetables well into November, December, maybe even into the new year, depending upon the situation you have. So we have the warmer soils that makes it great for growing cool season vegetables, the cool air, which keeps things holding in the garden, not bolting or going by quickly. And when you get into September and October, you have fewer pests. And so the plants can be actually just kind of resting there for you to take whenever you feel necessary to harvest them. So one way to approach this, though, is all with the planning. And when you think about planting the garden, it's not just about planting things in the summer for the fall, but thinking about it, what you're planting in the spring that'll be able to go all through the season and then harvest in the fall. So there are certain crops that I've mentioned here, one leeks and another one Brussels sprouts, that are long season crops. That means that you plant them in the spring and you're not going to do anything with them until September, October. There are others that you can do where you can harvest them as you go, or they'll just hold in the garden, like kale and Swiss chard, or parsnips. That will be perfect in the garden all season long, and then you harvest them as you like. Same thing with parsley too. Carrots and beets can kind of go both ways, where you can plant them early and harvest them, or plant them mid-season. So there are certain crops that you can plan into your whole garden design in the spring with the idea that you're going to have it as a fall garden. And that's something that I've been doing more and more of, is really thinking about what crops can I have in the fall that'll continue producing. Broccoli is a nice example because it keeps sending up those side shoots, so you'll be able to keep harvesting them as long as the plant stays healthy. Then there are vegetables that you want to plant in late summer into early fall that you can then harvest in the fall. And these would be the four groups I've kind of put together here, are the ones that are probably the easiest to grow. And that would be the greens, everything from spinach to collards, arugula being one of the hardiest ones there. Broccoli and cauliflower does really well in fall, especially cauliflower. If you've ever had a hard time growing that, it's a really nice fall crop because it heads up really well and then it holds in the garden really well and doesn't ever get ricey or bolt because of hot weather. As I mentioned, carrots and beets are certainly good, but radishes, you can be planting radishes right into the early fall. And peas are another nice fall crop that a lot of people don't take advantage of. By planting them in late summer, you can get a nice fall crop. And I'll go into all of these in a little more detail in a second. But a lot of this, as I'm talking, is all about planning. And that's really true for your fall garden. So this is a chart that I found from the Farmer's Almanac, and it is included in that handout, the link to it, so if you want to refer to it. The reason I like this one is it's broken up by the first expected frost dates, everywhere from September 10th to October 30th. So for example, where I am in the Champlain Valley, our first frost date is usually around now, around September or October 10th to the 15th. If you're up in the hills, it might be late September. If you're in the Northeast Kingdom, it might be earlier mid-September, depending on where you are. And it also can change depending on your microclimate. If you're in a cold hollow, you tend to get a frost earlier. If you're in a warm little spot, maybe with some stone walls or buildings around, you might be able to extend it a little bit further. But this is a nice chart because it shows you a lot of the common vegetables that you can grow and when you want to start them in order to get the harvest before that frost or around that frost time. They also include things here like peppers and tomatoes, which I'm not so keen on doing. Even though I do know some people will start tomatoes in June or so and still get a crop. In our climate, it's best to start those as early as possible to get the biggest harvest possible. So it's all about timing. And so first of all, you have to know your first frost date, just like I was showing with that chart. And once you figured that out, you work backwards. So if your first frost date is mid-October and you're planting a carrot that's 60 days, so obviously you want to be getting it in the ground somewhere around mid-August. But there's a caveat. You do have to add 2 weeks to those maturity dates on the package. So if it is a 60-day variety, you do have to add another 14 days. And the reason for that is, as we get into the fall, the limiting factor is not so much the cold weather, but the limiting factor is the short days. The shorter days, the lower light intensity really reduces the growth rate. So plants grow much slower. If you want to think about it in terms of time of year, October is similar to March as far as the day length goes. So it's really hard to get things to grow really strongly that time of year. So you do want to add 2 weeks to any maturity date, whether it be a seed you're putting in or a transplant that you're putting in order to have it mature on time. And then transplants, speaking of them, are better than seeds. This is true spring and fall. So I also want to refer to spring season extending as well, when you're trying to extend the season by starting maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks earlier than your last frost date. Transplants are better because in the spring, you have less chance of the seeds rotting in the soil, which often will happen, say with pea seeds, if you put them in April and you get a cool rainy spell, or lettuce seeds. And in the fall, if you're using transplants, a lot of these plants are going to be planted in the summer, late July, early August, somewhere in there. And there's a lot of pests out. So if you have a transplant, you're going to have more likelihood that the pests will not overwhelm it and you can protect it a little bit easier. And sometimes if the soils are too warm, plants like spinach, for example, if you try to grow them from seed, will not germinate very well. They want cool soils to germinate. So whenever you can, start with transplants. Maybe start them indoors. I often will do that. A lot of nurseries now will sell transplants. I know in my area, Red Wagon plants up in Heinsberg, I can get lettuces and broccoli and cauliflower in July there to pop into the garden as a nice fall crop. So let's go into these groups that I mentioned earlier in a little more detail, just to talk about how to plant them. So the broccoli family, the cauliflower and the broccolis. The key things with those, of course, is to start with the transplants, but also to protect them. Because if you put a little transplant in July, which is when you want to put these transplants in the ground for a fall harvest, you know the cabbage worms are still active and the aphids are there, and maybe you have bunnies around. So I often will tell people to put some kind of row cover or some kind of protection over these plants to protect them. They do not have to be cross-pollinated, unlike some other plants. So you can really grow them to maturity under a lightweight row cover, and that will save them from a lot of the pests and allow them to really get big enough and mature. Once you get into the fall, then you can transition to other protections, and I'll talk about those in a minute. For root crops, things like carrots, always look for the shortest maturing varieties. So if you have a choice between a 50-day carrot and a 65-day carrot, go for the shorter maturing one. You can also get carrots that are naturally small, which are a little faster and a little easier to grow, especially if you have clay soil. And those would be varieties like Little Fingers and Thumbelina. And the same is true with beets. Look for baby beets or beets that will mature a little bit faster so you can be assured that you're going to get a crop of these before the weather starts shutting down the production and the growth of these plants. For peas, a lot of people probably don't grow a lot of snow peas, but I think it's a great fall crop, and especially these two varieties. The one on the left here is Golden Sweet, and the one on the right is called Royal Snow. They're beautiful varieties in the garden, first of all, but also the nice thing about snow peas is that as they're growing up and they start growing, you can harvest those peas at any stage. So if you got a late start on your pea crop, you didn't get in the ground until August sometime, you still can probably, well, this fall, certainly no problem at all harvesting them, but you can probably get a nice crop of them even if they're small little baby peas. You don't have to wait for the peas inside to mature. Also, of course, with any of the peas, you can eat the tendrils and the little shoots and saute them and use them in salads. So snow peas are really nice ones to grow for the fall for those reasons. And then finally, the greens. Certainly the arugula and spinach and kale and Swiss chard are great, but lettuces are really nice. And a lot of people like to grow lettuces and have lettuces for salad in the fall. The key with lettuce varieties is to get some of the thicker leaf varieties. So that would be like the romaine lettuces and certain varieties that are adapted for winter growing. They have their winter in their names: Winter Density, Winter Marvel, Marvel de Quatre Saisons, which is a miracle of 4 seasons. Brune de Hiver is another one. These are all winter varieties that grow well under the low light conditions. They have very kind of crunchy leaves, so they can withstand a light frost much better than, say, a Bib lettuce that has a very light leaf to it. And they're adapted to growing in the fall. So look for those varieties of lettuces if you really want to grow them. Looking more towards the romaines and the loose leaf varieties, because those you can just pick the individual leaves of them. You don't have to wait for a big head to form. And then finally, once you have your vegetables and once you have your timing down, you've figured out when you're planting what and where you're going to get them from and how you're going to start them, you need to protect them, just like these folks are protected. And there's a couple different ways to protect your plants that are in the garden. This would be, again, spring or fall. These are cloches. So cloche is a French word meaning bell. It's usually, traditionally has been used as a glass covering over the plants, but now you can get these plastic ones like the one on the left. That's a great way to extend the season in the spring by putting them over a pepper or a tomato plant, or in the fall, same way. You can buy them, certainly, they're widely available, or you can make them just with milk jugs or soda bottles right over the plants. Now, they're not going to give a lot of frost protection, but they will protect the frost from that light freeze that you might get, the 32 or 30 degree temperatures. And that might just be enough to help them survive. The key, though, of course, with cloches is that they have to have some ventilation. So you can see the one on the left has some holes in it, and the ones on the right, of course, if you're using those milk jugs, make sure that the spout is pointing upwards. So that's a really nice way to kind of protect an individual plant that would be there. There are more sophisticated ways now. You can get tents that go over individual plants that allow you to protect bigger plants. And of course, the one on the right there is the wall of water. That's a plastic sleeve you put water in. That'll protect plants down into the 20s. And again, great for the spring. If you want to get that first crop of tomato faster than anyone else, you can use a wall of water on that. These are 2 examples of some cold frames that I put together over the years. I think I built these for $20 or $30. Just got some lumber, got some old window panes and some plastic, and put them together. And cold frames are nice because you can extend the season 2-3 weeks or so into the spring or in the fall, both sides of it. The key, though, with these is you make sure that they're well ventilated. And it's an easy way to kill plants is just to forget about your cold frame on a sunny April day or an October day, and easily those little seedlings in there can get fried. So using cold frames is a nice way to extend the season, but probably the best way is with floating row covers. These are polyester spunbound materials that have revolutionized growing. You see them all over the place. A lot of you probably already use them. And the key with the row covers is knowing the different weights, because all row covers aren't created equal. There's not just one row cover. You can get a summer weight row cover that will protect the plants from a light frost. It allows about 85% of the light to penetrate through that row cover. Now, most of these row covers are touted as being letting air through, water through, light through, all of that, but there is a certain limitation to it. The summer weight ones are great for crops, say in August or so. We want a little protection from any insects that might be there, and maybe just into September where you might get a little light frost. The all-purpose weight one protects plants down to 28 with 70% light penetration. This will be good going deeper into September, where you might get more of a freeze there, but you're still getting enough light that you're getting plant growth. So it's allowing the plants to continue to grow. And then finally, the garden quilt is really meant for those cold conditions that'll happen in October, where you get down to 25 degrees. It'll protect plants to that temperature, but you're only getting 60% light penetration. So you're really using the garden quilt to hold plants that are already mature or very close to maturing. So it could be carrots, it could be lettuces, whatever it is. This is a nice product to use because it'll hold it in the ground so it won't get killed by the cold weather. And you want to make sure you support these row covers too. You can use your own devices like the one on the right using PVC pipe and some bamboo and just drape the row cover over that. Or you can use material like that super hoop there on the left from Gardener Supply, which is a nice one to protect tall plants like a Swiss chard. And then you just drape your row cover over that as well. It's nice not to have the row cover in contact with the leaves, because if it does freeze, it'll freeze the leaves again as well. And if you're really interested in all of this, this is a very cursory kind of summary of everything. Elliot Coleman wrote the book on this. It's called The Winter Harvest Handbook. If you really want to spend a little time doing a little winter reading, I suggest looking at this because he's mastered the idea of growing crops year-round. And he's up in Zone 5, Maine, and he's been doing this for many years. And one of the techniques he uses that I use really effectively in my unheated greenhouse is using a row cover inside of the greenhouse. So it gives you double protection and allows you to grow plants. I grow greens and root crops and herbs right through the winter, just protecting them with this double layer without any extra heat. That book explains all the details on how to do it. So hopefully this kind of gives you an overview of some of the things you want to consider when you're trying to extend the season into the fall or start a little earlier in the spring with the right vegetables and the right timing of planting all those vegetables and some of the ways to protect them. So I think now we will open it up to some questions that anyone might have.
All right, so we have one comment from Gordon Clark, so not a question,
Okay.
but Gordon says that he's used 4 to 6 mil plastic on low tunnels instead of row covers and that it works well.
Yes, plastic is nice because it'll heat up things much quicker than the row covers will. You do have to watch out with the plastic, just like I was mentioning with the cold frames and the cloches, because it can heat up things up too much on a really sunny day if you're not out there, and it could actually fry things or have them dry out really quickly. Yes, plastic would work as well. I did get another question here, personally to me, asking about using leaves to protect the veggies that are already in the ground in the fall and in the winter. And actually, that is another way to extend the season without using the plant protection devices. So if you have root crops such as carrots or beets or parsnips, and they're in the bed, what you can do probably, I would say more later towards end of October or so when it starts getting cold, but before the ground freezes, is to throw a whole bunch of chopped leaves or straw on top of that bed. And I'm talking like 2 feet thick type of whole bunch. I mean, a lot of it. Because what you're going to try to do is prevent that ground from freezing. If you put enough of that on there and maybe you support it or hold it down with some row cover, for example, or some twine or something so it doesn't blow away, it can insulate the ground enough that it'll protect the carrots, the beets, and the parsnips so they never freeze. So literally you can go out in January or February, dig through the snow if there's any there, dig through the mulch and pull out carrots to eat. So it's a way to actually create an outdoor freezer or outdoor refrigerator for your root crops without having to bring them inside and store them in a root cellar, or trying to protect them with all these different kinds of blankets and quilts. So you can use that leaves to do that. Just make sure you chop them up. Don't use the whole leaves, especially if you have big maple or oak leaves, because they'll mat down and they can cause things to rot in the soil.
Great, thanks, Charlie.
Yeah.
So one quick thing before I get to a couple more questions. We did have one person type in the chat that they're having trouble seeing the slides advance. So if anyone else is having trouble, go ahead and type that into the chat function. To either to me or to all panelists and attendees, just to let us know if it's just one person's problem or if other folks are having that problem too. Hopefully things are looking better on your end. So to get to our other questions, we have a question from Rachel Huff. Do cloches fry the plants on a sunny day?
Yes, they can. And that is one of the things you have to watch out with cloches. And that's why the bigger the cloche, the better. So it is nice using those 1 gallon milk jugs or half-gallon milk jugs that I showed in that slide. But they're so small that it's really easy for those to heat up really quickly and fry a little seedling. The commercial ones that I showed are not actually very expensive either. They have a little more space to them. So that's probably a better kind of material to use. That's why those commercial ones have those little vents on the top, but frankly, I'm not sure the vent is enough. If we get a really sunny 70-degree day in September or October, it might be enough to really kind of fry that plant. One other thing, of course, you can do is if you're having some sunny stretch of weather and you're off at work and you can't come back to check your plants, is to put some kind of shade cloth or something over them just for that day, so that you're ensuring that they don't get harmed from the sunny, hot weather.
Great, thanks, Charlie. We have a couple more questions, actually one more question from Gordon with a little caveat. Can you discuss what to do to protect garlic that is planted this month? Does that also require a foot of straw or leaves? And his caveat is he's talking about hard nut garlic if it makes a difference.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, good question. So garlic is planted this month. In fact, you should be planting it now or very soon. And usually we just put not a whole foot or two of chopped leaves or straw on top, but really just maybe about a 6-inch layer. You don't have to really insulate it as much as you would for a carrot or a beet. The reason is the carrots and beets, you're trying to make sure that those roots don't freeze and thaw, because then they just turn to mush, because they're active, they're alive. Whereas the garlic, it'll be setting down its roots this fall, but then it'll stop once it gets too cold, and then it'll just go dormant. So you don't really need to protect it from freezing as much as you would with the carrots and the beets. So a simple 6-inch thick layer of straw or chopped leaves is fine. Ooh. Hello?
Sorry about that.
No.
I muted myself and then forgot to unmute myself.
Oh, there you go. There was quiet there for a moment.
My apologies. So thank you so much, Charlie. So that's all the questions we've gotten for now. If you do have any other questions for Charlie, go ahead and type those into the Q&A area, and we will answer them now. Or you can save them for the very end. We'll have lots of time at the end for questions for everybody. Anything else that you wanted to add, or questions that you wanted to pose out yourself, Charlie, before we close out this section?
No, I think we're all set, and yeah, definitely type in some questions for the end. And I'd like to introduce our next presenter, and that would be Bethany Dunbar from the Center for an Agricultural Economy. And she's going to be talking about their community hoop house that they've been doing there in Hardwick, Vermont. So Bethany, why don't you take us to the community hoop house?
Hi there, thank you. So I'll get this set up here. And I've got the same thing I started on the last one. Sorry about that. So I work for the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick. And first of all, I just wanted to thank Karen Gowan, who took these beautiful photos. She's from Greensboro and came by as a professional photographer to really do some documenting of our lovely community garden. So that was terrific and very helpful. So the Center for an Agricultural Economy is all about creating food systems, and much of our work is devoted to trying to create jobs in the food industry, or trying to get good, fresh local food into the schools. We also own a property in Hardwick called Atkins Field, where the Hardwick Community Gardens are located. And the place I'm sitting right now is called the Vermont Food Venture Center, where our offices are. So I apologize if there are any loud noises in the background. I've tucked myself away in the conference room, but there is some production happening, and so once in a while there's a little noise involved with that. So that's sort of the overall look, and the scene that you're seeing on this picture, the woman in the middle is Julie Paquin, who is our garden manager, and her husband on the left, and one of our Hardwick Elementary 3rd grade students is on the right. The hoop house is in that picture, and in the background is a 350-foot shed where granite used to be worked. So we have a rich history with this property and have worked to make it a really wonderful community garden for everyone. The second slide shows one of our community gardeners who's named Helena Carlton. And I note on this one the donation was in memory of Vernon Alper that allowed us to build the hoop house. So Vernon was a community gardener who always wanted Hardwick to have a hoop house, and he died very early. He was one of 3, and his mother presented us with a donation in his memory of $5,000 to put up a hoop house. So we were lucky to have that donation. We were also completely, really lucky to have all of the volunteers and community gardeners willing to help with construction of the hoop house, and even figuring out what kind of hoop house to get. So the gardens themselves, we have 40 outdoor raised beds that are 8 feet by 4 feet. And people were very interested in experimenting and growing things inside a hoop house. Our community gardeners, a couple of them are really very experienced and knowledgeable, but for the most part, we are experimenting, and that's a factor I will talk about a bit more in some of the next slides. So this is Julie again with the 3rd grade class, and you can see that half of the hoop house on the right side has beds, and it's sort of hard to see, but on the left side we built benches out of pallets that we had on hand here at the Vermont Food Venture Centers. So as we decided, yes, we of course would love to build a hoop house, there were all these factors to consider. How big should it be? How much, what kind of hoop house could we get for the budget that we had? We would need a hoop house that was very strong for the wind that is on this property. The property is also in a floodplain, and since we are a volunteer community garden, how would we maintain the hoop house? So one of the people who helped the most on this was herself a volunteer. Her name is Peggy Newfield, and she spent about 40 hours doing some research into various types of hoop houses that we might build and what were the pluses and minuses of the various types. We decided on this version, which is 25 by 40 feet. It is a harnois, which is made in Quebec, and so it can withstand 90 miles an hour winds, and it has a very elaborate system of footings so that it wouldn't get washed away in a flood. And the decisions about the internal shape of the beds and how many to do, our main first decision was that whatever we did, we wanted it to be flexible so that it could be changed if a different group of community gardeners later wanted to do it a different way. So we could shift any of it around. We could make more beds or more benches. So far, this has worked out well. People are enjoying it. We have 4 by 8 beds down the side, and each of those is split in 2. So if you lease a bed, you get a half spot, 4 by 4 feet. And each of the spots is $10 inside, and the spots outside are 4 by 8 are $20, but we have free spots for Hardwick area food pantry members, and we have a number of beds that are used by either the schools or food is grown for the food pantry. So they are used by individuals or they are used by nonprofit groups and schools. So one of the questions as we were having meetings and talking about what should we do with this hoop house, how could we do it to best meet our community needs, was what would the success of the hoop house look like? So for the lady in this photo, her name is Joyce Frederick's success looked like okra. They are from Oklahoma and they moved to Hardwick and really missed having okra. You can grow okra outside in Vermont, but it doesn't produce very well, apparently. I have never tried. Possibly Charlie could answer that a bit more in terms of other people who might have tried that. What Ron and Joyce have told us about this experiment for themselves is that it's working very well for them, in that they have grown quite a bit of okra. If those plants were in Oklahoma, they would have produced a lot more. But if they were just outside here, they would have produced a lot less. So for them, this little batch of okra is a success. It gives them their feeling of their home food. When we do our community garden survey at the end of the year, it's really interesting because there is there are about as many measures of success as there are gardeners. We have 64 potential spots for people, and quite a few people use 2 spots. And so there are about 30 individual gardeners as well as the organizations. So some of them say that the reason that they do this is for a cost saving, might be for healthier food, it might be for learning, or it might be for that sense of community. So inside the hoop house is the same side as out, in that we are, our desire is to learn and experiment and be very, very welcoming to everyone in our community, so that people don't feel intimidated by what seems like a very technical piece of equipment. For us, it's just a way to try something fun and see if we can grow some different crops or have more success. This last slide is building on what I was just saying in terms of, for working with especially the food pantry, to draw people in, to make people feel welcome. We love that culture of experimentation that is exemplified by our 3rd graders. Now, this is Julie Magoon's 3rd grade class from Hardwick Elementary, who use the space at the community gardens regularly. And one of the students last fall said, what would happen if we plant an entire ear of corn, just stick it in the ground? So that is what they did. And what happened was basically a bush of corn. So it was kind of a clump, and this slide shows some that was in a row as compared. The bush was not showing up very well in the photo, so I used this slide to say, this is our culture. We really want to try things. We really want everyone to feel welcome and to have healthy food and grow their own. We also have a project called Grow Your Own, and I mentioned that in passing, would be happy to explain more to other people for workshops and garden mentoring. And I just wanted to thank our 3 sponsors, foundations, who have helped us with Grow Your Own on this slide: the Block Family Foundation, the Vermont Community Foundation, the Ben & Jerry's Foundation. We've also had wonderful success from local sponsors and volunteers. So that's basically our garden and our hoop house in a nutshell, and I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Great, thanks, Bethany. So we're now going to welcome the folks from Change the World Kids.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to talk about food justice efforts. Oh, cool. Nice. Okay, our food justice project started because of a little girl in a food insecure family, an elder man surviving on cans of Surefine soup, and a woman living alone while her life was in crisis. While helping these people and others, we saw firsthand the effects of food insecurity in our communities. Change World Kids decided to do something to reduce food insecurity in our Upper Valley area, and to do it according to our focus on sustainability. We helped to launch the community gardens in the Woodstock, Vermont area, and now from our gardens, we deliver over 1,500 pounds of vegetables annually to the Woodstock area food shelves and needy families. When delivering our weekly truckloads of vegetables to the food shelf, one Wednesday in 2012, a Change the World kid asked, what happens during the winter when we don't stock our produce shelves? Little or nothing was the reply. No local produce was available during the cold months, so we set out to find a solution.
So after a lot of research, we designed and built our food justice root cellar, and during the entire process, we learned every step of the way. It was a lot of hard work, and it turned out to be a really incredible project. As a result, we deliver locally grown vegetables to food insecure individuals all year round. So you may be asking, why a root cellar? We love sustainable solutions to issues. We know about drying, canning, and freezing vegetables to preserve them, and we applied those ideas to the root cellar. So a root cellar is kind of like magic. It's an underground room into which you put fresh vegetables, close the door, and then the vegetables are able to keep for months without any processing. So the root cellar that we built really embraces simplicity. It was designed by Change World Kid alum Finn McFarland, who was the co-chair of our Food Justice Root Cellar Committee at the time, and she was able to use Google SketchUp to design it. So our root cellar uses no fossil fuels to maintain its cold storage temperature, just the temperatures from the ground. So to kind of build our root cellar and get started, we began by researching details about the root cellar construction and checking out other root cellars that were in our local community. So we learned that a small root cellar can simply be like a barrel sunken into the ground or based in a subterranean location, or a hole dug into the ground like a tornado storm cellar, entered by lifting a manhole cover or by a set of downward stairs. So we ruled out the manhole lid entrance because of the amount of snow and ice that we get up here in Vermont, and it would require so much maintenance every time that we wanted to access it. And then we ruled out the downward stairwell entrance design because of the likeliness of repeated flooding during the fall and spring, especially when the ground was frozen. So to us, it made the most sense to enter the root cellar from a level or slightly sloped up path. So we had factors to consider that might not be as important if one was building a root cellar just for like home or family use. We wanted easy access. Since we would be storing and distributing relatively large amounts of vegetables, it would be great to have the pathway to the root cellar door wide enough for a wheelbarrow. The produce would be given to people outside of our families, so we really wanted to make sure that it was clean. Construction would prevent rodents and bugs from entering. We didn't want mold or water issues. I mean, who would? And we wanted the walls and shelving to be easily cleaned. And we also wanted our construction to last a long time and to not need constant oversight and repairs, because we knew that the group of Change World Kids who tended to the root cellar would change regularly as current members aged out of the group and younger kids joined. So root cellar operations and maintenance needed to be streamlined and clear.
And we really wanted it to work. So the concept of a root cellar is that on every side there's at least a 3-foot berm of dirt to insulate and to keep cool the space. So the site of the root cellar is actually really important. We sought sites that enabled us to build into an existing hill with a face that was protected from sunshine to maximize the coolness. And a north-facing slope is ideal, but we did look at some sites that didn't have north-facing slopes. The hill should have a steep enough slope so that all 4 walls and the roof of the root cellar have a minimum of 3 foot of soil all around them. This provides the insulation to maintain the temperature inside the root cellar between 32 and 40 degrees year-round. We borrow the cold from the deep down cold temperature of the earth.
When excavating, we ran into a ledge at the back of our site. The result was that we could not go as far into the slope as we had hoped, and had to build up the soil behind retaining walls at the front of our root cellar. The vegetables needed high humidity of 90 to 95% to keep them from shriveling. The moisture from the surrounding hillsides keeps the humidity high. Our floor is made up of 2 to 4 feet of gravel on top of dirt to help maintain the humidity and to prevent the sorts of puddles that can occur on cement floors of root cellars.
So at this point, you may be wondering which kind of vegetables store well or the best in root cellars. So we found that beets, carrots, potatoes, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, turnips, rutabagas, parsnips, and leeks store the best. We do store apples, which are placed near our outtake air vent, and they keep until February. And then our winter squash, garlic, and onions we store in a dry space that's a little bit warmer. So in the root cellar, we store certain vegetables, such as carrots and beets, laying down in dampened wood shavings and bins. And then our leeks are stored standing up in damp sand. And then we also use plastic bins for vegetables requiring higher moisture and less airflow, and wooden crates made in Vermont for others.
So our root cellar is 12 feet by 14 feet on the exterior and 10.5 feet by 12.5 feet on the inside. We chose concrete because other wall building materials such as stone will shift over time and lumber will rot. Either of these can let in insects and rodents and water into the root cellar. We needed our root cellar to be very safe because it would be accessed by youth. It's also located on the property of an elementary school. So the thick walls are made of concrete reinforced with steel rebar. The front of the building and the front halves of the side walls have 4-foot frost walls. That's because we had to move the design forward because of the ledge. The floor is gravel, and this extends more than 4 feet deep right in front of the cellar where there's the frost wall, and it provides excellent drainage. We reinforced some of the areas with blueboard insulation where where the walls meet the roof and the door.
In addition to the gravel that creates the floor of the root cellar, we put in a perimeter drainage gravel and pipes to keep water from entering the root cellar. We engaged a structural engineer to design our roof. It has special ordered and extra strong rebar and is designed to support huge amounts of weight. A root cellar is run by youth and visited by the public, so we wanted to be absolutely certain that the roof would withstand the load of the earth and vegetation on top of it.
So when we were building the root cellar, we really wanted a lovely door. So we found that the door to a root cellar is most efficient if it's insulated. Wooden doors may look nice, but they can warp, crack, and mold over time. So during stretches of below 0 Fahrenheit temperatures, frost developed on the inside of our insulated door during the first year of operation. We added a layer of blueboard insulation on the inside of the door as well to kind of alleviate this problem.
So we don't have any electricity, and our ventilation is provided by simple vents. If you look to the left of the root cellar, you can see a circle, and it looks like a blue dot. That's our intake vent, and the air moves by the physics of air transfer. The cold air comes in through that vent. It's blocked by the blue board right now. It's during construction, but it opens up and lets the air circulate. We do that just by pulling blue board in and out by a rod, and then the air circulates through the root cellar and exits through a vent in the upper right-hand corner of the roof. We fabricated the insulated flaps in the vents to control airflow. They're very low key. And we changed the depth of the blue board on the vents during colder or warmer times. Many vegetables deteriorate in the light quicker than darkness, and we use only low lighting. Actually, we use mostly headlamps. And the back of the building meets ledge, so once our landscaping plantings grow, the hillside will look much as it did when we started. We like to think the hillside is repurposed to meet the ongoing community needs. We built a very sturdy structure. Almost all the labor was done by volunteers. A local architect volunteered to review our construction design. A structural engineer volunteered to design the roof. A local construction company, Colby and Tobias and Builders, provided on-site expertise and most of the tools. A local excavating company, Mosier Excavating, provided the excavation expertise and equipment. And we did have some equipment rental fees, and we paid for the materials. But some of the materials were donated, and building material stores gave us discounts because of our community focus. The longevity of the structure will make any of the initial expense seem very small. We are really grateful for the generosity and the support given throughout the building process.
At the end of each gardening season, we fill our shelves with winter storage vegetables. These are grown in our gardens, gleaned from local farms by Change the World Kids, and donated by other growers in the community. Donations of vegetables come from people with small gardens and farmers growing on large plots and acreage. We also seek cash donations that enable Changeable Kids to harvest winter storage vegetables from local farmers. Changeable Kids distributes a selection of vegetables each week throughout the cold months. The more vegetables we have, the more we donate.
So when we're asked if it's successful, the answer is a gigantic yes. Our Food Justice Root Cellar, which we opened in October 2013, provides locally grown vegetables to food shelves, farm-to-school programs, and local food insecure individuals throughout the winter months. Our final beets from last year's summer harvest were delivered early 3 weeks ago, firm, crunchy, and still beautiful. Our intense pre-construction planning was very much worth the trouble. To date, we've had no damage or incursion by rodents or bugs, and 2 weekends ago, we did our annual vinegar and water solution wipe down of the walls and shelving, and we found that we had no mold. We hope that our root cellar would inspire others to create root cellars to benefit the food insecure in their communities, and this actually happened. We've given tours to organizations, college and student groups, members of other nonprofits, and individuals interested in creating a root cellar of their own. So most of our joy really comes from our delivery of vegetables. We have colorful displays all year round, thanks to our amazing root cellar.
That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Olivia, Morgan, and Phyllis. That was a great representation of the good work you're doing in Woodstock. Awesome. So it has come time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, even though it's a lovely picture. I'd hate to take away from it. And this brings us to our question and answer period. A couple of things I just want to note real quick. One is, again, a reminder that you can post your questions in the Q&A area that should be located at the top left-hand corner of your webinar screen. If you post those questions, I will then pose them to our presenters here. Also, feel free to share any successes, ideas you have yourself. This is a great forum for kind of sharing things too, so don't be shy. And I encourage you to also continue the conversation on social media. So you feel free to do that now while we're kind of having our Q&A or following the webinar itself. Our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram information's all up there. And feel free to just bring the conversation to the wider community and pull other folks in and share ideas and resources. Also, more resources on everything that was just talked about today can be found on our website at this link here. Directly following the webinar, I'm going to send an email to all of you with an evaluation that I ask that you fill out while everything's still fresh in your mind about the experience, but also the same link and some other resources that you'll find in that email. So look for that right after the webinar. And so I will, without taking up any more time, I will go ahead and open it up to question and answer. I don't see any questions typed in yet, but I have loads of questions, so I'm just gonna go to it. But feel free to go ahead and type in anytime questions pop up for you. So my first question, I think, would be for I'd like to actually pose it to both Bethany, her project, and the Change the World kids, Morgan, Olivia, and Phyllis, specifically around sort of what it takes to manage these projects. And I'd love to hear both about what it takes to manage in terms of how much time it takes to manage, and then also just any lessons learned in management. And I'm gonna, just to make it simple, I'm gonna start with Bethany.
Okay, that's a really good question. And when we thought about putting up a community hoop house, it was a little nerve-wracking because we thought, well, how will we take care of it on an ongoing basis? For us in Hardwick, the desire for a community hoop house, it went along with willingness of volunteers to put their time into it. So while the CAE has the ultimate management role, we have volunteers who do the vast majority of the management of the hoop house themselves. This woman who was in the slide that I mentioned as our manager, Julie, gets a stipend. It doesn't cover half of the amount of time that she puts in. But we do give her a small stipend. She goes over to the hoop house twice a day. She lives just up the road, and she was one of the people who helped us build it in the first place and really wanted to use it, so she was happy to be in charge of basically making sure that those sides get rolled up and down, which is a very easy function to do, but it has to be done twice a day to make sure that the temperature is good for everything that's inside. One of the other people in the slide, Helena, was another volunteer who stepped in when she can't do it. So Julie does most of it. Helena does kind of weekends and things. And in terms of big decisions, like what are we should we change the number of beds or something like that, that would come to me as the programs manager. But I do try to let the group kind of figure things out for themselves as to what they would like to see. And there have been some tricky ones. We've had questions like, well, what if there's some blight or a pest on a plant right next to somebody else's, and you try to get in touch with that gardener and they don't show up? Well, we'll have to deal with it. We can't wait. So that's an example of some of the management questions that have to be made basically by Julie, with sometimes in consultation with me. But it is very much self-managed, and we have a waiting list. So I think that the management is working so far, and along with that culture, as I mentioned before, of let's try it. Let's not be too restrictive or technical. Let's just try things. Does that help?
That's great. Thank you, Bethany.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. And Morgan, Olivia, and Phyllis, what could you tell us about management and the time it takes to manage your root cellar?
So the biggest part management-wise that we have, it's pretty easy, pretty simple. The biggest management that we have is our gardens and kind of maintaining those, planting, weeding, harvesting, and then delivering. But the actual root cellar itself is fairly easy to manage. We have one harvest day where community members bring all of their kind of produce that they want to donate to us. And then that's kind of our biggest push. And we pack all that into the root cellar. And then we have a pretty good jumping off point for harvesting our vegetables, putting them in the root cellar. And then from there, all it really takes is kind of getting what we want out of the bins, remembering the organization of the root cellar, and then delivering it to the food shelf. So pretty easy.
There's one more question up here, and we just wanted to clarify if they're asking about the structure of the root cellar or the structure of Change World Kids. And if it's about Change World Kids, Change World Kids is a teen-run nonprofit that puts out good vibes about humanitarian efforts and environmental efforts locally as well as internationally. And if you have any more clarifying questions, just ask.
Great, thank you. And there's actually on the link that at the bottom of this page, there's a little bit more information about the Root Cellar project, and I think some links to Change the World Kids information too. Really great program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'll keep going with my questions until, but again, feel free to pop more questions in there. So this question would be, I guess this would, again, we continue to pose to Bethany and Morgan, Olivia, and Phyllis. Just ideas. I know that in both of your situations, in Bethany, you had a donation that was given that funded the project, and it sounded like there were lots of kind of community donations that came from your community that Changed the World Kids. But just ideas for funding some of these larger projects, creative ways of funding and making these things happen when you may not just have the resources right there at your fingertips.
So we did have a donation for the Hoop House, but we've also thought that on some level, potentially, it could start to help pay for itself. We haven't done that, but I think that There would be potential for part of the space being used to grow something that could be sold, like potentially flowers, to help pay for that. So in that case, it might have been a loan instead of a purchase, but we were lucky enough to have that donation. I would say that it's just been tremendous, the community support since we built it, and for, as I mentioned, the Grow Your Own project as well. Almost so many of the local grocery stores have helped us with materials for workshops, and I think that depending on your community, you could potentially drum up that support within your community. And certainly, I think the fact of working on a project like this, and if a group has a big plan and really wants to do it, that if you get people involved early on, and for example, if I had just said, oh, I want a hoop house, it wouldn't have worked. So there were so many people who really wanted it to happen that was a big help. Okay, so I'm going to stop now.
Great, thank you, Bethany. That's great. Any other thoughts from the Change the World Kids crew?
Yeah, so ever since we built the root cellar, initially it was a big cost for our group, but we got a lot of local support. But ever since we built it and it's been running, we don't really have any external costs that we need to pay for. We get the shavings for free. We're very careful with our materials. I don't think we've spent any money on it in the last 6 or 7 years that we've had it.
Well, since 2013.
So I guess 3 years, not 6.
5.
5. Woo, time flies by. But we've just had a really great time with it. We haven't had any expenses since we built it, so that's been awesome. But as far as creative fundraising goes, we've had a lot of fundraising efforts with just like the general food justice program, one of which I created and now head every year, which is our annual food justice garden tea party, where we take vegetables that we harvested early on in the summer and we make fun foods out of them. We invite community members to come. We don't give a formal presentation, but we have high tea and we always have a really fun time with it. It raises a decent amount of donations for our food justice program, and if needed, some of those donations could always go to the root cellar. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, just as you were closing up there, a bunch of questions popped up. So we'll start right at the top. One more for you all, Change the World Kids, from Rachel Huff. What is the involvement of the elementary school with the Change the World Gardens and Root Cellar?
The root cellar, we store, it helps with farm to school, and the farm to school program stores some of their vegetables in our root cellar. We also do presentations and we talk to the kids about it because they can see it from their playground and they'd be like, what's that? And it's cool to inform them and just tell them all about it so that they know.
Yeah, so also we involve our elementary school a lot with presentations and our activity booklet. So once every couple of years, we go and do a presentation and a tour of the root cellar for elementary schoolers. And then we also have the activity booklet, which is kind of made by them for them. So we create a lot of activities such as like crosswords, word searches, mazes, coloring for pictures. And it just helps them kind of wrap their heads around sustainability, like what goes into the root cellar, how you maintain the root cellar, just really basic kind of our core ideas about it. Yeah.
Great. Lots of ideas. Thanks so much. And actually, Gordon has something else for us. No questions, but please pass on my thanks and congratulations to Change the World Kids and the Center for Agricultural Economy. Great, great work. And I would second and third that.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
So one more question that's popped up here from Helen Fields down in Bennington. This one's for Bethany. Bethany, how successful has the Center for an Agricultural Economy been at incubating business startups based on agriculture? Examples? And I see that there's something posted also in the chat there. There might be some more coming.
I did try to type in a bit of an answer to that one. I saw that, and I know that a study was done of how many jobs have been created in the food system in Hardwick in recent years. The Center for Ag started in 2004, and it was definitely about creating jobs. I don't know about how many businesses have started up through our efforts, but I think that mostly what happens here is that the businesses have already started and they come here to scale up. So a business that might be just making making a product in their home kitchen, for example, they're already a business, they have a business plan, and they're ready to use some commercial size space. That would be a more typical story for what happens here at the Vermont Food Venture Center. The other work that we've done is try to help farmers who are trying to get into markets such as the schools, hospitals, and other institutional markets. So I think if you look at our website, www.hardwickagriculture.org, you will be able to get some of that information in more detail than what I can remember right now. Or also just email me after and I'll try to send you some more details on that. But yes, we have had some success. It's been really an exciting place to work, to see people growing, and some of what we call alumni businesses that move out and get bigger. That's exciting too. So always something going on here.
Great, thanks, Bethany. So I have another question. We just have a little bit more time here to pull Charlie back into the fold. And this question actually can be for Charlie plus anyone else that wants to answer. Just what season extending techniques would you recommend for small gardens? Suggestions that are simple, inexpensive, do-it-yourself. I know you mentioned some of those in your presentation, Charlie. But what would you suggest people start with? Again, thinking the DIY cheap ways to kind of get started on season extension.
Yeah, if you don't want to go the route of buying the floating row covers and using that kind of material, which is recyclable, meaning you can use it for a number of different years. I have some garden quilts I've been using for many years now. But if you didn't want to go that route, I think the cold frame route is probably the least expensive, the most DIY way to go to create some kind of structure where you can actually start things earlier in the spring or extend them into the fall. Like I said, when I put those two cold frames together, I went to a local restore, what do we call it? A place where they sell all kinds of building materials that have been salvaged. A salvage yard, that's the word for it. I went to a local salvage yard and got those window panes very inexpensively. I had the lumber there, so I was able to put that together very cheaply. And you can build pretty good sized cold frames that won't just be like a 4x6 kind of thing, but much larger, where you can actually grow a fair amount of food in them. And the nice thing about the cold frames too is that not only can you extend the season spring and fall, but you can grow things in there in the summer too. You can get cucumbers in there or other kinds of vining plants, melons for example. Get a really early start with them in the spring, and then because they're in that frame, they'll be able to accumulate even more heat than the outside garden would have, and they grow a little bit faster. So I think when you're starting out and you're really just wanting to engage the community and having volunteers and not spend a lot of money on materials, that's probably the best way to go, is to start with a cold frame.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Anything else that anyone else wanted to add to that picture of DIY in either the hoop house or root cellar, inexpensive ways to make things happen?
I would just second the motion about the cold frames. That's something that we've been experimenting with also in the community gardens. It just seems like an easy way to get started on that kind of thing.
Great. Thanks, Bethany. And thanks, Charlie. All right, so we have just a couple minutes left here. I'll give people just a chance to, if there's any final questions that you want to pop in there. Also, if our presenters have any questions for each other or for the wider group, now would be the time to bring that in, so feel free to kind of interrupt here. While I'm kind of waiting for any final questions, just mention a couple housekeeping pieces here. So like I mentioned, directly following the webinar, all of you will receive an email with the link that's here below at the bottom of the page, as well as, and actually on that link, things to note, there's a video that Charlie made actually specifically for this webinar that goes over a lot of those basic tips. So it's a great thing to share with others that you know that want to kind of learn some of those basics, maybe share it with your gardeners, that sort of thing. Also, some of favorite tips around hoop house building and root cellar management are also in there, including, I think Bethany mentioned the research that, was it like 40 hours of research that Peggy put into researching the best hoop house for their project. We get to benefit from all of those hours of research. She's shared that document that she put together as a part of that, and that's on that page of resources as well. Also in that follow-up email would be that evaluation. Please fill it out as soon after the webinar as you can. Like I said, I'll put that together right after I get off here. And also to let you know that you can continue to ask questions over email. So feel free to email myself at libby@vcgn.org. You can respond to the email that I sent you in a little bit. If other questions pop up for myself or any of the presenters. And last but not least, this is being recorded, as I mentioned earlier, and so if this is something that you want to watch again later, or someone else from your group wants to watch later, that there will be that opportunity, and we'll send that to you hopefully by tomorrow. We'll have that ready for you. And I think that's about time. Any last notes from our presenters before we close things up?
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Libby or myself with anything related to gardening.
Great.
Yes, I would like to say thank you also for the chance to tell people about our hoop house. We're very proud of it.
Yeah, we just want to say thank you so much for having us and allowing us to tell you about our root cellar. It was really great to hear from both Bethany and Charlie. So thank you so much again.
All right, thank you all, Charlie, Bethany, Olivia, Morgan, and Phyllis, and thank you all for joining us today. Really great work, and great to have you, and hopefully we'll do more in the future.